actually see that? Spot the designer. Made a cock up on my first slide. Yeah, I do wish to stress you have a good read of that. I'm a pretty passionate person. Those of you who know me probably know that. Those of you who don't, I've just told you. And therefore you can expect quite a lot of colourful language. I'm also from Yorkshire as well, where cock is a term of endearment, so it kind of doesn't make any moan to me that I swear quite a lot, but a lot of people don't like it. So if you don't like it, I'm sorry. You can either leave because you're in the wrong fucking room, or you can stay and kind of put up with it and whinge at me later, which I'm happy. Just try not to tell my mum. But yeah, I mean, I just thought I'd try and tee up with this little gadget. I run my own studio, which is, I guess, technically a kind of your classic graphic design agency. You know, we do sort of full whack of all kinds of things that a graphic designer would do. But in terms of, I set up 5 years ago, really, after doing the traditional well-trodden path of big agency, small agency, middle agency, see what you like agency, to sort of try it out. And I was getting a bit tired of the kind of eating the same shit every day, and I wanted a bit more of a rich and varied diet. And I thought that as you go through these things, as you'll all know as creatives, whether you're students or whether you're practicing designers, you curate your own sort of belief system as you go through your career. And you start to say, yeah, I'm a little bit like that, and I'm not doing that, and I like that kind of work, and I like those kinds of ways of working, ways of thinking, and you pick things up and you sort of start to evolve your own practice. And I sort of wanted to do a bit of design, and I wanted to do a bit of graphic design. What's that big banging? Is it doors? I keep thinking it's me, like fucking Godzilla. You know, I wanted to do this sort of traditional design work. I really enjoyed that, but I also wanted to do more teaching, more writing, and more work where it took it away from kind of me as an intermediary between a client, what I thought, and an audience, and more about, you know, what I thought of something and then trying to find an audience for that kind of work. And that's kind of what I set up this as a principle. And I've kind of become a bit of a protest boy. Protest boy? Poster boy for protest. Too many P's. Because of this kind of difference, because it's led to me and my studio doing a lot of sort of self-initiated work. And as I said, I've kind of got to the point where I don't see design in a kind of traditional communication sense. I mean, it does do that, but I see it as a much wider sort of intellectual discipline, and I see it much more like curating than I would practicing as a designer, sort of, give me your content, I'll shift it around and make it look nice, and then we'll churn it out into whatever kind of medium discipline you like. This is a quote by a French philosopher, which is up there to sort of make me look more intelligent than I am. But I do see it as a really good summary of kind of how I try and operate as a designer, in that I try to use a lot of other ideas that I've seen and transport them from other places, and try and reappropriate them into other things to find other ways into stuff that still has meaning to everyone. I'll get onto it a bit later, but I'm not a big believer in like the absolute originality, that idea of like absolute truth. I don't think it exists. I think if someone comes up with something that's purely original, no one will understand it and it'll be rejected because there's nothing for it to be grounded on, for it to bed into. And I think it's much more about combinations and reappropriations of things. And the other reason, I guess, is because of this book, which I did a couple of years ago now, called In Love and Memory of Work, which is on the miners' strike. As I said, I'm from Yorkshire, and I come from a mining family, from a mining community in Barnsley in South Yorkshire. And this dispute, the miners' strike in 1984, lasting a year, is the longest industrial dispute this country's ever seen. So therefore, it's had a lot of, analysis, whether that's historically, politically, socially, academically, but it hadn't at all been sort of examined culturally, and I thought that was a fucking crying shame, because there was a lot of cultural assets came out of this, and I don't just mean graphics that we can all kind of understand, your posters, your badges, your slogans, but poetry, but performances, but films, but music, and so much stuff came out of this, and it was just being ignored. And this book has sort of been a culmination of my kind of belief system that actually everyone is creative, and everyone, when they believe in something, and when, certain, things much against their nature are forced, creativity feels like the only option. And I find that like unbelievably interesting. And I'm probably going to disappoint you, to be honest, because I'm not really interested in like slick campaigns. I'm not really interested in, stuff that might have come from an ad agency. I mean, I love that work and I love stuff that comes from designers, but I'm also like really, really interested in stuff that comes from someone who probably don't even know what graphic design is, or probably never heard it as a term, but they're actually practicing in it. And I'm not really interested in that kind of background, that whether they mean it or not, and whether this industry does, try to enforce it or not. I don't think it does. It's just my personal opinion. Just to fucking back that out there at you. That's that sort of straitjacket of that generalisation that it is a, white, male, middle class, heterosexual industry. And that's something we've got to fight. But I see much more interesting stuff coming from those other backgrounds, from working class backgrounds, from backgrounds of minorities, and they're all doing amazing stuff that has value to us all. And I don't just mean that as a creative thing, although that's kind of what I'm going to talk about. There's some really interesting work. I mean, this is a quote from an American social activist saying that all those great things that we see, those great bits of change, just come from tiny little things that might get overlooked and never recognised from unknown people. And that's kind of what I'm really trying to focus in on and look at. That's not to say, as I was saying, that I don't appreciate the kind of bigger picture. I'm not going to stand up here and say that this is a piece of shit anti-war, creativity. It's fucking Picasso. I'm not going to say that, but like I say, I'm not interested. We all know this piece of work, probably, and we all know what it was doing. And whether this was a successful piece of protest or not, that's for everyone to decide. It didn't end the Spanish Civil War, but we all know about it. And it was a physical, creative act. But I'm less interested in this and more interested in what, I hate the word, but ordinary people, for lack of a better term, what they do and what they create. But before any of that, I just wanted to, I'm going to sort of rattle through some examples of that. But before that, I think there's a really good definition to be made, and this is sort of my definition of difference between protest and activism. I see protest, not always, but as a more singular kind of act. It's a certain response and a certain manifestation of resistance. That's what I see protest is. Activism, I see that as a much more sustained piece of activity that goes on for a lot longer and probably takes on, it's a lot of different things trying to get to the same aim, whether that's through medium or timing or whatever. So it's more like protest is a project and activism is a bit of a campaign. That's kind of how I see it. I'm happy to argue about that with you at the end when we have questions, which I hope you all come at me with, because what's the point in talking about fucking protest if you don't disagree with me? So I just wanted to make that. But I think there's a lot of certain things, and these can be the smallest, tiniest little gesture. But as you look through what people do when, under severe hardship and how they respond to sort of how they respond creatively, however it manifests itself, whether it's writing or whether it's, graffiti or a poster or something visual or performance, you see these sort of key themes that crop up that as humans we tend to sort of hook our thinking on and our response to things. And one of them is repurposing things. And I really love it. I mean, like I said, I grew up with a granddad who, he had a drawer in his kitchen. I'm sure some of you might have had this as well. And it was just full of shit. There was all sorts of stuff in there. Shoelaces, fucking screws, doorknobs, stuff that didn't seem to have any purpose whatsoever. And you'd be like, Grandad, what the fuck? Clear this out. And he'd be like, nah, you never know, lad. And then you'd see him in his garage fixing something with a coat hanger and a bit of tape and he was fixing problems, and I love that. And I love it when people make statements with stuff like that and they sort of go that step further. They solve problems in their everyday lives and then they start to project that longer when people come collectively under frustration to say something. This is in the Czech Republic, the Velvet Revolution in the 80s, when the Eastern Bloc was breaking up. And in the Czech Republic, it was a civil protest. It was a non-violent action. They didn't want to fight the Russians to get out of their country. They didn't want to sort of regime change through violence. So they used to lift their house keys up and just jangle them and tell them to go home. And that's just such a simple, you know, boiled down gesture. It kind of doesn't mean anything, but everyone's got it, and everyone can do it, and collectively, you can imagine the mass that must make, the impression. And all these soldiers that are just stood there, or, you know, or militia or police or whatever, all the authority, what can they do? And that kind of sort of level of civil disobedience is really creative, but it's kind of away from the kind of, as a loose term, there's a sort of industry viewpoint of what is a graphic design or a creative response to something. Jangling your keys, it's like, you know, you get laughed out of the fucking meeting room, wouldn't you? But collectively, together as a response, I think it's amazing. This is another one. Sorry, this picture's a bit shit. This is from Poland, again in the really early 80s, at the same time the Eastern Bloc breaking up. And when they passed, again, non-violently, to have trade unions so that they could legislate workers' rights and better standards to work in, better pay and all that kind of stuff. They set up their own trade union called Solidarity because it was made up of one collective union for all the nation's workers. And then the Russians got fucking fed up and they called martial law and they said, no, that's illegal. Because that's the first thing they do when, you know, a regime wants to sort of silence people and take control, is they ban, you know, demonstrations. You know, you can see it happening in Russia now. But so they weren't allowed, any kind of trade union sort of manifestation was banned and you get locked up for it. So they took their resistors, literally to the word, their power resistors, out of their radios and started wearing them as badges. But again, they can't do anything about that. Just something everyone had in their kitchen out of their little radio and becomes this sort of symbol of something else just because they've reappropriated it. And I think that is an unbelievably genius creative idea. You know, or even more modern times, you know, Charlie Craggs, who is fighting completely different issues in a completely different way, just sitting down with someone and having a manicure and having that one-to-one sort of interaction with someone to talk about transphobia, you know. For trans people who, you know, they get so much stigma in press, they have this sort of, just this weird fucking horrible media push about what that kind of person's like, and it's just disgusting. So to get one-on-one action in a creative way, and you know, and Charlie, you know, she takes a little festival van around, and she goes into places like the V&A or into art galleries or to festivals. She sits down, you have an appointment, and you sit down, you talk to her about issues, and you get one-on-one interaction, and that is just unbelievably simple and unbelievably powerful. Just that one-on-one interaction. And even going, you know, way further back, this is kind of a bigger issue, but there's one little thing within it that I think is, it's not lovely, but you know, when against the sort of the black shirts, not too far away from here in Battle of Cable Street in the 30s, when the Jewish community were facing a march from, you know, what were termed as the fascists, there was there's a reason they call it the battle for obvious reasons, but you know, a violence erupted. The police escorted the black shirts through Cable Street, and of course there was a resistance. But the thing that I thought was just a creative gesture was they all sort of in the houses, the sort of the housewives and the people that lived in in that neighbourhood, they saved up all their waste, the kitchen waste, all their food waste, and they just tipped it out onto the streets, onto them when they were all fucking scrapping. And again, it's just a reappropriation of something really simple, but it's still a creative gesture. There's loads of these things, but I'm only going to go through a few and I'm going to have to rattle up because I want to ask questions. I said, reclaiming things as well is another kind of thing that you see a hell of a lot of. And they take something back and use it against the sort of people that they're feeling oppressed by, or the people in power. You know, a really famous poster, pretty disturbing Artworks Coalition about the war in Vietnam. Taking a statement from a soldier on television. I think the full quote would take for ages, but essentially the soldier's being pressed on how many people he's been ordered to kill, and he's sort of describing just shooting and, you know, just spraying the people in front of him, And he's saying, so you don't know how many people you shot? And he's like, no. And he says, so you're shooting men, women, children? He's like, men, women, children. And he said, and babies, and babies. And they take those words and they feed them back into the system, and it becomes an incredibly, obviously married with some skill from the Art Workers Coalition, but it becomes an incredibly powerful thing. And the same happens here in ACT UP when the AIDS crisis broke in America in the 80s. The reclamation by ACT UP of the pink triangle symbol, which was used in concentration camps, they decided to take that and make it their own and use it as a campaign to stop, to essentially attack the American government and the FDA and all the drug approval people, because people were dying on the streets. And such an incredibly graphic and powerful symbol for that struggle. And ACT UP were pretty amazing because they were like the first serious, organised, kind of media-savvy organisation in the States to really kind of go for stuff on a protest level in terms of their frustration. They had a lot of people who were professional designers, but they all worked collaboratively. All the artists, all the designers, all the just sort of people who had ideas, who were aware of the politics and condensing messages down. You need all of that, and they all came together and worked in a really kind of slick way. They were almost like an agency for this kind of protest and this kind of work. And some of the stuff they did was incredible. If you can look it up, the ACT UP group, or if you look up, there's a great book called Demographics, which documents all of that kind of struggle, and some of the stuff they did was remarkable. And equally, distillation being really simple. A lot of these times when people are fighting against something, they're incredibly complicated issues. I mean, just Brexit, for fuck's sake. Let's get it out there. That is an incredibly complicated issue, whichever side of the fence you're on. That is an incredibly complicated issue. So it helps when you're trying to get a message off, just as you would in any kind of campaign, to distill it right to the absolute core of whatever it is. I think this is an incredible example of that. Just the suit, what the fuck, It made news, it was the right choice of media at the Olympics, and it becomes an iconic symbol of struggle. I was torn between putting this up and the chair that, what's his name, Huey sat on, that they were going to make into a monument, his sort of wicker chair. It just became an iconic thing to the photograph. But that is just the raised fist, such an iconic thing. And it's just distilled all of that struggle against the police brutality that blacks were facing in America in the 60s, 70s. It's all there in just a raised hand. And the Paris 96, in the 60s, this was just, this is kind of that kind of cliche of saying, if you look up in the dictionary, this is what you'd see. This work is unbelievable. But it's just incredibly complicated issues about education and the education system in France, and the students setting up their own atelier and making all these screen printed things. Illustrations, words. If you look at the graffiti for this, it's French, so it's beautiful, but fucking hell. But even in other things, the Hillsborough disaster is an incredibly complicated issue. And 96 people lost their lives. And there was a massive struggle against cover-ups and oppression and judicial systems and political systems. And they condensed their campaign so that anyone could use it just by using the numbers. And I think that's incredibly powerful. But the one other thing, can we just play the video, please? Is they go a bit further by having their own anthem. And I think, although this was in the 60s when they started singing this song, You'll Never Walk Alone, it's become sort of reappraised in itself to sort of stand for those 96 people. So anyone that comes to Anfield, they hear that song and everyone takes notice of it. And that, again, in itself is an act of protest. Someone standing up and singing a song that everyone knows that means something to those people. And the campaigners, I can only imagine how they feel thinking about the families at that time when people are stood up there singing for them. Some good belting signs in there as well if you keep your eyes peeled. know the words, don't you? One of the qualities I tell when I teach and talk to students and stuff, one of the key qualities I say that I think every kind of creative person or designer needs is empathy. I think without it, you're kind of screwed, really. If you can't, as a designer, if you can't step into sort of someone else's shoes and understand their problem to then try and apply your creative thinking to it, what kind of meaningful impact do you think you're going to have on that work? I mean, you're just going to be fucking hairdressing, aren't you, really? And just making it look good. And that's not what you should be doing or what you should be aiming as creative people. And I think empathy is key to that. And I think humour is an amazing way into empathising with people and understanding. And if you can, again, like the complicated issue thing, if you can tell a joke about it and people can understand it, they're kind of on board. And humour is such, it doesn't all have to be, you know, fucking doom and gloom and harbinger of death and shit like that. You don't all have to be grim. You can make people laugh about complicated things, about struggle, about issues. And this is a zine which just uses, again, the empathy there is that everyone knows these fucking cookbooks because she shits them out every other month, doesn't she? And they've just a really simple shit Photoshop twist on it, but it looks how it should look, it feels how it should feel, and it talks how it should talk. And if you wanted to craft that even more, you'd just be, forgive me, but you'd be overcooking it, wouldn't you? But that's the power of it. The way it looks is how it should look. You know, can we just play this? This is a performance from the miners' strike, which I love.
Now I know a nice young policeman of disposition sweet, and all the children greet him as he patrols his beat. He's kind to dear old ladies who want to cross the street, but he steps on evildoers with his great big plates of meat. Now he'd never bend the evidence or take a bribe, thank you, of course. He's an upright heterosexual and a credit to the force. He's honest, kind and truthful, fearless, brave and keen, the finest human being that you have ever seen. And he has no racial prejudice, he is totally without sin, protecting Pakistanis from the violence of the skins. Impartial on the picket line, to the striker he's a friend. He is stainless, faultless, peerless, conscientious to the end. Oh, ha, 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 oh dear!
Goes on forever, but you know, that by Mike Elliott. He's just a miner, and he's down his local, you know, trades club, standing up in front of everyone he knows, everyone he works with in front of the village, and he's wrote this song based on the Laughing Policeman, because the relationship between those kinds of communities and the police during the miners' strike just completely broke up. It was shattered, and it's not been rebuilt to this day, to be honest. And the reason why that is so clever isn't just because, yeah, it's funny and it makes everyone laugh, but it actually goes deeper to that, and a lot of this work has layers. And that song, and why he chose that song, obviously because it's called The Laughing Policeman, has that link, and there's a creative idea there. But also that generation of people grew up with that, knowing that, because I think it was the tune to a cartoon that they all grew up with as well. But it shows a real kind of enterprising spirit that the miners had that I love as well, because this ad was playing at the time. Can you just play that, please, mate?
Kill! Kill!
Lem said, why suffer when you've got a cold?
It's the 80s, folks. You've got to love the 80s. And that was the miners' response to that as well. And if that's not the meme of the 80s, I don't know what is. And if that's not what we all try and do as creative people working in this industry, then maybe I'm doing it wrong. You know, it's kind of every kind of thing you would, every nerve you could want to hit as a designer, putting your work out into the world is there. You know, it's current, it's also rooted in something deeper than that, and it engages with people on a level that kind of everyone can enjoy. And again, it looks the way it looks because it should. As a designer, what the fuck are you going to do to improve it? You know, do a better illustration or, you know, whatever. And there's one other thing I want to talk about, really. The really sort of successful campaigns, the really sort of successful movements that, I mean, I'm going to come on to it in a minute, but, you know, to really sort of do, that really do make change and that really do refocus people's attention is that they build on each other. And I don't think any kind of movement has done it in the way that women do. This is a quote from the 19th century, which I think is scarily apt. And I'm talking, like, even before this, right back in the 15th century, women were massively involved, like in the levelers movement. They were involved in trying to get, you know, in ending suffrage for everyone, not just for women. And then building on that, of course, the suffragettes and the suffragette movement. And women's movements, they take this in a way, I mean, they kind of epitomise everything I love about creativity. They take what worked and what is relative to them and their struggle, and they use it, and then they're really creative with it. This is a picture from Greenham Common, which is a women's only peace camp in the 80s, where they were, you know, fighting, you know, nuclear warheads being stored there, and they marched down from Wales. That's how it started, and then they camped out there for years, and it was women only. And then the banners, if you can see the banners that they did, they were incredible, and the way that they set up their own sort of infrastructure. I was going to say it was like a festival, but that kind of makes it feel all, you know, peace, love, save the world, which it kind of was. It was the peace movement, but they were really, really, really amazing. And that kind of idea of it being a women's only protest has kind of stood. You know, again, my bias comes into it. Women Against Pit Closures, there were years, you know, like literally a couple of years overlap between them and Greenham Common, and women at Greenham Common actually came up to Yorkshire. They moved up to places like Sheffield and Leeds and supported Women Against Pit Closures. They helped them found it, and Women Against Pit Closures used a lot of what they learned from that movement in their own. And Women Against Pit Closures, for me, were the most amazing thing that ever came out of communities like mine. I'm really proud that my mum was a member. And they invented a social structure that didn't depend on wages. They could feed kids and families with no wages. They could clothe them. They could buy them Christmas presents. They could send them on holiday. During a 12-month strike where the traditional patriarchal model of bloke goes to work, does his shift, comes back, wants his food on the table. The role of the woman is to look after the kids, clean the house, cook the meals, step, repeat. That was fucking boom, out the window, because suddenly the men were out of work. And it changed everything, and they changed it. And if there was one good thing that came out of a pretty horrible part of time, it was Women Against Pit Closures. But even that, movements today like Sisters Uncut are still building on those ideas. Sisters Uncut is a female-only protest, and a movement. It came out of the Uncut campaign against the Tory austerity cuts to services, mainly public services for women's needs and stuff. And they've just done a recent one on the bridges. I'm sure you all remember it, those of you that live in London. And they're building, and it's creative, it's intelligent, it's unbelievably savvy, and it's fucking amazing. It really is, and we can learn from that. We really can. And even the Pussy Hat project. What an incredibly simple gesture to just wear a hat. You know, you don't have to spend time making a sign. You just rock up and wear that. And the response is overwhelming. But I guess if you've noticed, all these things are physical. How does digital come into it? You know, all acts of protest, I think, it's a kind of pacification for your frustrations with stuff. Stuff feels shit, so I need to feel like I've done something about it. So I'll sign a new petition, or I'll go to a fucking rally, or whatever. That is true. You can't deny it. But there is a difference between physical and digital kind of protest. I'm not saying digital hasn't done anything amazing, because it has. This was amazing. mydavidcameron.com, where the Tory party, when this was the run-up to the election campaign in 2010, released this campaign. Unbelievably airbrushed, everyone laughed at it. And then Clifford Singer made an online resource where you could go and change whatever you wanted. And, you know, airbrush for change. Just, again, an incredibly simple digital execution. And it gets, you know, it's amazing. This was amazing as well. And again, you know, you look at it and it makes you laugh because, yeah, it's a bit daft and, you know, he's a twat. Whatever else. But, you know, again, there's levels to it. You know, there's a lot of intellectual play there about what they're kind of picking at out of his kind of frailties and stuff. I love the Pokemon one in the bottom right. I think that's brilliant. And, you know, they're clever. But the thing I struggle with digital is they're a bit kind of throwaway. And digital and physical, you know, it's a completely different dynamic when you're in a group of people. And, you know, in the kind of, whatever they call it, the post-truth world we live in, every one of us in this room would question, you know, a number on a petition, or a number of hits, something seen, or a number of likes, or a number of shares, or whatever. But you can't really question when you're in a group of 100,000 people, and the sort of dynamics. And then again, the digital thing can help that. And I think that's the thing, that, you know, there isn't a difference. It's not one or the other. It's not an alternative. It's a complement, and I think people forget that. I even think people forget that when they're working with digital. It's not this or that. Why don't you make them work together? But as I said, I think all this stuff is just done by people at a point of frustration where creativity is their answer. And as designers, I think, you know, because I'm a designer, but as creatives, there's a lot we can learn from that. That if you know, honesty and conviction are massively important. People respect that. Whether they agree with you or not, they respect it. And everyone can kind of get behind that if you're open, if you're honest, and you have conviction. You can do stuff with not a lot of fucking money, with not a lot of resources. You can be incredibly impactful. You know, the thing I love about all that stuff is, like, you know, when I say if you're going to have a post and it's scrolled, what are you going to do? Change the typeface? It's like, fucking hell, you lose so much from it. You know, a designer would impose a certain amount of taste on it, and it's just wrong. You're missing the point. It's really reflective when you do this kind of work or stuff that means something that means to you. You learn so much about yourself, both inwardly and outwardly. What do you think about things? Complicated subjects. You express them, and equally, how you express things does reflect back on you, and that is really interesting and a massive learning curve. And being truthful to oneself, I think it's a massive shame. I've said this before, that all this talent we have in this industry, and you know, 80-90% of it goes on shit we don't care about. And I think that's a massive shame. I think that's a massive waste. You know, there's a lot of stuff that D&AD are pushing that way, and I think that's amazing and more to it. But we can do more, we always can. But that comes from people, individuals, collectively, and individuals. But you've got to be true to yourself. You've got to know what you think is good. You've got to know what you believe in, and you've got to work towards it. You've got to want to change shit. You can't just whinge. You know, the top line there, art is not enough. You can only do so much with creativity. It is a means, not an end. You know, the ultimate means on anything that you're trying to change is the change itself. It's not, I want to do a fucking poster. Because that's, again, you're missing the point. But get together with people, talk about these things, and you can, you know, if you're frustrated with stuff, you can change it. So I just wanted to say that, really. Just a couple of things. Is that's the reason I'm into kind of protest. It's not because I come from that background, which I do, and I'm incredibly proud of it. It's the fact that I see humanity in it, and I see expression, and I think everyone has it in them. Everyone can be creative. You're not special because you're a designer. You're not special because you work in this industry. You've trained that muscle harder than maybe anyone else has out there. And don't fall into an arrogant position thinking you're better, because you're not. Everyone can have a good idea, and you can see them all and use them. Because of that, all our experiences are what takes us to where we are. And it's up to us what we do with those experiences, whether we share them with other people, whether that's through teaching, or whether we share our opinions our political and social beliefs with others, but you can use your skills to do the kind of work that you care about, and you will feel better for it, trust me. So yeah, that's it. I'm good. Now,